Brandon, thanks for being here. You're part three of our presentation. That's to help employers get up and running again and plan how that happens. And can you help us start the path when we're looking at benefit issues? And I'll kick it off with this initial question.
Sure.
We've got employees who have been on furlough or maybe laid off, but have not been working, and perhaps they were participants in a 401k plan before the crisis hit. What sort of process do employers have to have prepared in terms of having them re-enrolled so they can resume that participation in 401k plans?
Yeah, great question. And so, Charlie, when I think about all of these issues about bringing people back to the workplace from the employee benefits side, I'm thinking about what kinds of things do I see people make mistakes on that they should be thinking about now so they don't make those mistakes. And so, for example, to your question about bringing people back to work that were 401k participants before the furlough, those people are entitled to come right back into the 401k plan immediately. You shouldn't be making them, be subject to some sort of a waiting period. You need to get them rolled immediately. And to the extent they had deferral elections in place, we need to make sure, like if Brandon Long said, I want to pull 4% of my compensation out of my paycheck and put it into the 401k plan, we need to make sure there's a process in place that's done correctly, just like you do when someone's onboarded, so that you're double checking that the elections they have on file line up with what you actually do. Because anytime, I always tell people in the benefits side, it's like when I was in Sunday school, and the teacher said, if you got one sin, you're a sinner. It's like if you make one mistake, the IRS thinks your plan is disqualified, and so you have to correct it. And so it's just make sure that you get people enrolled immediately and make sure that their deferral elections are in place correctly. One other thing that I thought about, as you were talking in part two about people coming back to work, and maybe this phased approach where you might have people coming back at a lower level of hours maybe than they had before COVID-19. Some of those people may want to change their deferral elections. And so if I don't have my full paycheck every time, I may want to, and I previously had said I want to defer 7% of my comp out of, into the 401k plan. I may want to say, I'm going to ratchet that down to 3 or 4%. And so maybe you give your employees the opportunity to make a new election or a fresh election that reflects their current financial situation given the crisis. So, yeah.
That's a really good. So we've had some sick leave issues. We've got this Families First Coronavirus Response Act, what we affectionately refer to as the FFCRA. I know there have been lots of questions about people, if they get this sick pay, do we withhold on their 401k contributions? And if so, if we haven't done that, what do we do to correct that?
So the answer is for most plans, great question, to the extent there was some of this sick pay paid out or extended FMLA leave or whatever that is called that you guys on the HR side call it, to the extent that money has been paid out, it is just taxable income to employees. And so for most plans, unless there's a specific carve out, deferrals should be withheld from those amounts. And to the extent that money has already been paid, because the time we're talking about bringing people back to work, to the extent you have missed that deferral election, Kirk, the good thing about fixing this error early is that it will likely allow you to not have to contribute an amount out of the employer's pocket to fix the 401k piece. So it's real easy to fix it if you've had this scenario where you've paid out these sick wages and you've not pulled deferrals from the amounts. Typically, when you have an error like this, the employer puts in a contribution equal to two pieces. One is the missed deferral, which is 50% of the missed 401k amount that the employee would have otherwise pulled out of their check. So the employee's already got the money, but you screwed up and didn't pull their 3% out. Typically, you have to calculate whatever that amount is, and then the employer puts that amount in half of that, okay? That piece, if you fix it quickly, most likely you don't have to put that one in, okay? So that'll save the employer money. The second piece, though, to the extent that you have a matching contribution that's tied to deferrals and you've missed pulling deferrals out of those sick leave amounts, you're going to need to fund that amount along with an adjustment for earnings. It should be a very small amount if you do it now. So great question, though.
We've heard a lot about student loans and other type of loans that the payment schedule or garnishments have been deferred or frozen. Some employers may have employees who have taken loans out against their 401k. Are there any provisions that apply to 401k loans that our employers ought to know about.
Yeah, Charlie, the CARES Act, which we've been talking about, was signed March 27th. It says that for certain qualifying individuals, they are allowed to basically delay repayment on their plan loans for 2020. And the qualifying individuals who fit into this category are people who've been diagnosed with the coronavirus, or their spouse or their dependent has been diagnosed with coronavirus, or they have been adversely impacted financially because of a furlough or a reduced hours or quarantine or lack of child care. And so if you have one of these qualifying people who fits into one of the buckets that I just mentioned, they are entitled to delay any loan repayments for 2020 until 2021. Okay. There's a part of the CARES Act that authorized employers to allow those same individuals to borrow more money from their 401k plan. A lot of employers have chosen not to turn that feature on. And frankly, I think that's for a lot of people a good move. For other people, it's not, but for a lot of people, it is. But regardless of whether you turn that feature on or not, if you have someone that fits into the categories I mentioned and they had a plan loan on March 27th or after, you probably need to give them the opportunity to delay making payments for 2020. That if you think about what I just said, that means you're going to have to identify the people that have plan loans into two buckets: COVID-19 loans, people that fit into those qualifying categories, kind of COVID-19 loans, and non-COVID-19 loans who will be handled just like any other loan.
So let's talk a little bit about health plans. I know that you and your group deal not only with a lot of 401k issues, but a lot of health plan issues and making sure that those employer plans are in compliance. What should employers really be thinking about as it relates to returning people back to work insofar as it relates to health plans?
Very similar to what they should be thinking about on the 401k side, Kirk. And so if you're bringing people back from furlough back onto your health plan, they are most likely eligible to go right back onto the plan immediately. And why do I say most likely? You need to look at your plan document and make sure that whatever it says in terms of who's eligible, a lot of plan documents say that an eligible person is someone that works on average 30 hours a week. I think a lot of employers or some employers are going to be bringing people back at less than their normal level in terms of hours. And so to the extent that's the case, you need to make sure that whatever your plan document says, that you adjust it to reflect what you're doing with your workforce. And so if you're bringing people back and you're going to put them, they're going to be back to work at 30 hours a week right off the bat, they probably need to be right onto your health plan immediately. No waiting period, right back on the health plan. To the extent they lost coverage, a lot of you maintained coverage even for people in furlough status while they were on leave. But if you bring people back, look at your plan, whatever it says, and make sure that your plan doc, you can adjust for, if you're self-funded, which most of you are, you can amend your plan document to say that for some period of time, as we, and I like to build in language for some of you that have done this already. I like to build language into the health plan that specifically references this pandemic, because I think it gives us a lot of goodwill, and if it shows that we're being proactive for our employees and our workforce. So build some language into your health plan that says during such and such period of time, as a result of the COVID-19 crisis and the phased approach that President Trump has announced, we're going to, for this period of time, allow people to remain on the health plan who only work 20 hours a week or something like that. And then after that period is over, then you can amend it back to your normal time frame. But that's what you need to be. And also make sure that the premiums that they are supposed to be paying for their health plan coverage are reinstated, similar to what we talked about on the 401k side. So eligibility involves getting them enrolled again, making sure your plan document lines up with what you're doing, and also making sure that they're paying their portion of the health plan premium out of their paycheck like they should be.
And are you and your team helping clients amend plan documents to make sure that the language is precise and clear?
Absolutely. And a lot of times, the TPA will draft some in. We're also reviewing amendments that other people prepare too. On the fully insured side, the fully insured space has got, they've been given a lot more direction from state insurance commissioners about what plans have to do. But on the self-funded side, and so my point of it, a lot of the carriers are pushing amendments out or changes out to the insured side. But for those of you that are self-funded, somebody needs to likely draft an amendment to your plan. Tying into that, by the way, a lot of you have, because of the CARES Act, you're providing testing for COVID-19 with no cost sharing, which is what we're required to do. There is a requirement, as you know, from the Affordable Care Act that says if you have a summary of benefits and coverage in place, an SBC, which summarizes the coverage available under your health plan, if you make a material change to your health plan mid-year, you're required to give 30 days advance notice. That's even if the change is favorable, believe it or not. Well, fortunately, about 10 days ago, the government published some FAQs that said they're going to give us a pass on that requirement. So if you've turned on, for example, testing, COVID-19 testing with no cost sharing, if you've turned on telehealth when you've not had it before, we get a pass on the summary of benefits and coverage, the advance notice requirement. But it also said that same guidance said we have to push one out as soon as possible. So somebody needs to be sending out a revised summary of benefits and coverage like now. And so, so to reflect the changes you made to your plan.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit, Brandon, and talk a little bit about dependent care or child care. Pre-pandemic, we may have had employees who had routine withholdings from their earnings for dependent care or child care. These people are now returning to work, much like Kirk's question on re-enrolling for health care. What process do you recommend for employers when you've got employees that historically have had those kind of withholdings for dependent or child care?
So what has happened? The good news is we have a lot of flexibility with dependent care elections. So for those of you that have employees that they have money pulled out of their paycheck to cover dependent care through your cafeteria plan, you have a lot of flexibility. And so to the extent people have been home and they've not needed child care because their child care is closed or because they're home and don't need it during this period of time, you've had the flexibility to turn those elections off. And likewise, you will have the flexibility to turn it back on. So to the extent someone comes back to work and they need child care and their daycare is open, you can allow them to start making fresh elections on a go-forward basis as long as your plan document allows that. And so that's the key, is always look at your plan, look to see what your plan document says about whether you can make elections. You can adjust your plan language if it's not right and make sure it lines up with what you're doing. You know, the overall one maybe final thing I might mention, actually two final things on the benefits side before we wrap up this part 3, relates to those of you that have laid people off. You know, we have this scenario that we've talked to you about where on the 401k side, when you terminate 20% of your workforce, you are presumed to have something called a partial plan termination. Sounds very boring and nerdy, but what that means effectively is if you terminate more than 20% of your workforce, everybody terminated within that plan year, including the people terminated along with this COVID-19 reduction, has to be 100% vested in their contributions. And so what happens if you don't catch this now, Brandon terminates employment, I have $10,000 in my 401k balance, you show that I'm 50% vested, you have a partial plan termination and you don't know that, and so you only pay me $5,000 because I'm 50% vested in my employer contribution. If you've had a partial plan termination, you're supposed to vest me at 100% so that I get my full $10,000, which means when your auditor discovers this in 2021, when they're out auditing your plan, you're going to have to figure out how you go back to that employee and give them more money, and that's probably money that's going to have to come out of your paycheck or out of your pocket. So you can catch that now. And we've been encouraging employers that are laying people off to catch that now. The good news is if you start bringing these people back in the same plan year that were, laid off as a result of COVID-19, they will help with that 20% calculation. And so, get back with us or whoever your consultant is that's helped you with that, because it's very likely, or it's possible at least, that bringing people back to work will help you not have a partial plan termination. So,
well, what's really, really clear to me, Brandon, is that employers that are in the process of planning who they're going to bring back, when they're going to bring them back, what changes to the workplace are going to happen, what sort of screening, both initially and ongoing, all important parts. But you have to factor in these 401k, health insurance, and maybe dependent care issues at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and other, your dental, vision, life insurance, all that other stuff too. So everything I just talked about applies to those as well.
Thanks for your time.
Sure.
Very, very helpful.
Sure. Thank you.